This is They Create Worlds, episode 236, Jordan Mechner and Karateka.
If anybody wants to find me, I'll be in the last place you would look. In a place where people used to be, a land that's called reality, you'll find me there.
Welcome to They Create Worlds. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm joined by my co-host Alex.
Hello.
We join you once again with a cat. A cat in my lap. Why is a cat in my lap?
Because you let him, and now he will never leave.
Well, now that we have gone into our whole new era of They Create Worlds, Cat, Alex, and Jeffrey, we're going to have to bring in more people so that we can create a whole panel. So we're going to bring in a few more cats and this Jordan Mechner person.
That's right. Today we are going to begin what I imagine will be a two-part look at the life and career of one Jordan Mechner, most well known for Prince of Persia, also Karateka, The Last Express, and some of the early Prince of Persia reboots that came out of Ubisoft. He's an interesting fellow. I mean, obviously he's a game designer worthy of our attention because he's done a lot of highly successful and very influential games. But the thing that makes him especially interesting is that starting in 1982, he started keeping a journal that he has kept up, to my understanding, ever since. I think he still keeps it up. A few years back, he actually released some of those journals, not all the way to the present day, but journals covering the period from the beginning in 1982 through when he was finished working on Prince of Persia. He did not publish every last entry from these journals. He left out stuff that he thought would be too tedious or perhaps too personal. But the entries that he did include, he did not edit in any way. So they are his unvarnished thoughts from the time, which are absolutely fascinating because this is a guy that was never in his earlier years completely dedicated to making video games. Karateka, he started in late 1982, didn't finish until late 1984. It's a good game and all. It's somewhat sophisticated, but it is not a game that needs that long if you are fully dedicated to creating the game. And then Prince of Persia took even longer. He started it in 1985 and didn't finish it until 1989. So there's a lot of stuff going on in his life in that time period, and to get a window into some of his thoughts and his indecisions, not just around games, but about what he was going to do with his life, is really quite fascinating and unusual. We do not normally have that kind of thing.
So really a great opportunity to have a really deep look into his thought process. He's made some very important and influential games.
Absolutely.
Karateka, starting off the whole fighting genre.
Yeah, a couple other games came out about the same time, but absolutely, all of them together. Yeah, really launching fighting games. Then Prince of Persia, what are often called, genre classifications still aren't great all of the time in video games, but touched off what some might call the cinematic platforming genre, this idea that you're not just hopping around platforms like a Mario back in the day, but you're trying to do something that is fairly realistic and mixes in elements of platforming, puzzle solving, and combat to create a total cinematic experience. So games like Uncharted in later days and the later Tomb Raider games and whatnot owe a huge debt to what our man Mechner did with Prince of Persia.
So in this look, are we just going to focus purely on the journals that are released, pull in some other information? What's really going to be our focus here?
Absolutely. So we'll do both. I mean, our goal here is to provide an overview of Jordan Mechner. But we're definitely going to be able to use those journals to deep dive on some issues that we normally wouldn't be able to. But we will pull in other sources as appropriate to give kind of the full picture of who Jordan Mechner is. He's still around. And what he was doing with his game design career. And we'll probably take this a little past the Prince of Persia as well. So, I mean, the journals will stop, but we'll keep going to talk about some of his later career as well.
So before we delve into where he was born, where did he grow up, and what kind of led him into video games, you, the audience, have a mission.
They do?
They do. Because coming soon to a podcast near you, We're going to be live again, Alex. We're going to be broadcasting and recording live for like 12 to 18 hours and being very, very tired at the end of it.
I suppose so. That's right. We are going to be doing our annual live stream, hopefully sometime early on in October, though we are going to hedge on those dates a little bit until we can be absolutely sure we can meet that commitment. But one way or the other, we will be doing one of those crazy 9-ish hour live streams, this time covering the history of probably the most fascinating company to ever be in the microcomputer industry, one Commodore International.
Not just the computer price wars.
That's right. We looked at that particularly fraught period of the computer price wars in the past, but in this case, we are looking at the entire history of Commodore International and its predecessor company, Commodore Business Machines Canada. From Jack Trammell's humble beginnings all the way till the bankruptcy of the company in 1994. Big topic.
If you happen to be in the Atlanta area for, I don't know, end of August, beginning of September, some sort of Labor Day weekend or something, Alex and I will be there celebrating the 10th year anniversary release of They Create Worlds in person, by talking about Nintendo.
That's right. As has become an annual tradition, we will be once again at DragonCon in my ongoing quest to get my friends who otherwise would not come to DragonCon to come play with me at DragonCon. Jeffrey's going to come down too, and we will be giving another one of our video game history panels, this time on the launch of the NES in North America, the test market in 1985 in New York City. Longtime listeners will remember that we did a very special Christmas episode covering the same topic, so unlike the last 2 years' topics, it will not be followed by a episode of the podcast as well, but this being the 40th anniversary, that was just way too good a topic to pass up for this little talk.
So yeah, if you have the opportunity to be at DragonCon, feel free to stop by and see us, say hello. You might see us rampaging around the convention. Feel free to come up and say hi. I promise we don't bite hard.
That's right, and I also volunteer with the con and work the information desk, so you may even catch me at one of the help desks spread out across all of the host hotels and can say hi to me there as well.
Enough preamble, enough shop talk, enough whatever the pre-banter is called these days. I don't know. I just edit this stuff. Jordan Mechner. He was born. He left the hospital. Then what?
Well, actually, we want to start a little earlier than that because the family history is actually somewhat fascinating. We're not going to, this isn't Know Your Roots. We're not going to get deep into the family history, but the family history did shape him to a degree and was so impactful on him that he even wrote a graphic novel in 2024 that explored some of this family history. It's a good idea to take just a second to discuss where the family came from. So the Mechner family is an Austrian Jewish family by origin. His grandfather, one Adolf Mechner, was born in a little teeny tiny town in the very hinterlands of Austria in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A spit of land that later became part of Romania, and then even later than that became part of the Ukraine, as borders moved in response to various world wars and other disturbances, which will become important in a little bit, may become relevant. He was a doctor, ended up living in Vienna, had a medical practice there, and was there, of course, then in 1938 when Anschluss happened and Germany annexed Austria. Adolf Hitler annexed Austria into Nazi Germany. This meant that it was probably time to leave, seeing as they were a Jewish family. Jordan's father, by this point Francis, had been born in 1931, so he was a young child. The family needed to get out. This is a challenge for a few reasons. First of all, the Nazis were okay sometimes with Jews getting out because they were kind of generally, obviously they would go on to do the Holocaust and all that horribleness, but their main aim was just to get the Jews out of Europe by any means necessary at this point, which could mean a lot of very deplorable means. But one of them was that they were happy for some of them to just leave. But they usually gave them a very hard time when they were trying to leave, and it's actually very funny. As funny as something involving Jews in the Holocaust can be. The way they finally got their papers is when Adolf, unfortunate name in these circumstances, when Adolf Mechner was a young man in Vienna after World War I, he was a World War I veteran, he bought a couple of paintings by a struggling wannabe art student in Vienna by the name of Adolf Hitler. Hitler, of course, for those that don't know, was a failed painter after World War I. He had really tried to get into art school and failed. He tried to make a living as a painter for a time. That didn't work out. And as people do, he turned that into a, dictatorship that plunged all of Europe into horror. Yeah. Good job, guys. But they discovered he actually had Adolf Hitler paintings. I mean, Hitler was a nobody, when he bought the paintings. It's not like he bought them after Hitler came to power or that he admired Hitler as a leader. He certainly did not. But it just so happened that they had paintings by Adolf Hitler. So he showed that to some of the Nazi officials, and they thought that was kind of cool because it's the Fuhrer and all. And suddenly they got some papers. Yeah. Just one of those crazy stories. Probably the only reason the Mechners are alive, that Jordan Mechner was ever born, is probably because his family bought a couple of original Hitlers back in the day.
That's insane. I'm not sure if I want to use the word serendipitous here, but that is insane.
Yeah, so that bought them some time and some papers to move the family a little bit. They ran into some other problem outside of that. Because, you see, it was one thing getting out of Nazi Germany. It was another thing to get to a safe haven. Nobody was really under any illusions that any part of Europe was going to be very safe. Nazi aggression was on the rise. Anti-Semitism was on the rise. Just moving next door to France or Switzerland or something didn't feel like a great way to get out of this. The main way that people wanted to immigrate out of Europe was to go to the United States. The United States knew this, and they were happy to take some people in, but they set quotas on how many people could immigrate and how many Jews could immigrate from these countries. Now, Austria had a decently high quota. I don't know exactly what the quota was, but it was one of the better quotas for accepting people. The Mechners were Austrian, or so they thought. I mean, they grew up their whole life in Austria, with fellow Austrians, with fellow Austrian Germans, speaking German, being Austrian. But as I said, borders had been shifting around, and after World War I, that little village, as I mentioned, that Adolf had been born in, was annexed out of the Austrian portion of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to Romania. So, as far as the United States was concerned, Adolf Mechner was Romanian, because he was born in Romania. Never mind that it wasn't Romania at the time. It's Romania now. He's Romanian.
Thus leading to different quotas, probably lower quotas.
The quota was under 300. The waiting list was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000.
Yeah, not processing that quickly.
Yeah, so Adolf Mechner was able to get him and his son Francis, not his whole family, he had another child and his wife, he was able to get them out of Germany, but he wasn't able to get them to the United States because of the quotas. Now, they were fairly confident because his wife and his children didn't have this problem. This was a him problem. The rest of them were actually Austrian. He's the one that was Romanian. They were fairly certain that they were going to be able to get around this problem relatively quickly for the rest of the family. So he and his son left because they felt they were in the greatest danger. They left Germany, Austria, but it was part of Germany at that point, and went to France. But then, because he couldn't get in the United States, Adolf Mechner went on to Cuba, because Cuba was accepting Jewish refugees at higher levels than the United States was. But he left his son in France because they were certain that his wife's visa was going to come through any day. she was going to be able to immigrate to America. And so the thought was she would just pick him up in France on the way to the coast of France, where they would board a steamship to America. He actually voluntarily left his son behind in France. He could have taken him to Cuba, but left him behind in France because they thought mother and younger sibling were not far behind. And then there were delays. By the time those delays were resolved, World War II had broken out in the West. First, there was the invasion of Poland, there's some stuff in Scandinavia, and the Phony War, and then Germany launched its blitzkrieg through Belgium, Luxembourg, and Holland, and then into France. Francis actually ended up being stuck in France for a few years, occupied France. Mother finally got out and got to New York with younger sibling, father in Cuba, and Francis in France with a relative, not all on his own. Actually, I'm not sure if it was a relative or a family friend. Now that I think on it, I'd have to look. But the point is, he was with a guardian that the parents were cool with him being with. He wasn't just like fending for himself. So yeah, kind of a fascinating family story of division across multiple countries across the world as part of this Jewish diaspora that was becoming ever more fraught with the onset of World War II. But they did all finally get out. They finally all got out, and they were finally all able to make it to America. I think by 1944, they were all united. From that point on, the Mechners were American. Francis never lost his Austrian accent. He's still alive. I think he's in his 90s now, but Jordan's father is still alive. I can do that math. 31.
95, 96, somewhere in there.
Exactly. So he's still alive. He never lost his Austrian accent. His son, Jordan, was born in the United States. Francis Mechner is actually an important character in this story, and that's part of the reason why I took some time on this family stuff, because one thing that these journals of Jordan's reveal is that his father was incredibly influential, as we'll see as we go on, in the development of Karateka. He's a fascinating guy, Francis Mechner. He has his own Wikipedia page, too. Jordan is not the only famous Mechner. Francis Mechner is a psychologist, and a very well-known, at the time, psychologist. He received his PhD from Columbia University in 1957. He made some important advances in using symbolic language for the codification and notation of behavioral contingencies, or so his Wikipedia page says. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds on that, because they create worlds, not they create mental states or something. But he was a very renowned psychologist, a master-level chess player, and an accomplished classical concert pianist. I mean, this guy's got it going on. Francis Mechner is a big deal in his own right. In some ways, he's probably even a bigger deal than his son.
Certainly, if you have enough skill to do psychology, to do really high-level chess playing, and concert pianist, that's a lot of hours dedicated in your hobbies. And from what I understand of most medical professions, you have to spend a lot of time just to keep on top of that with new journal entries, new whatever's coming down the pipeline, not to mention just long hours.
Absolutely. And again, I haven't researched him in depth. According to his Wikipedia page again, he even helped a little bit in the original design of some of the psychological aspects of a little show called Sesame Street. Like, he's not one of the creators of Sesame Street. I think he was probably a consultant as a psychologist, kind of helping them figure out some of the best ways to do learning with children. But he was involved in his own small way, and it was a small way, in the creation of Sesame Street.
That is quite the pedigree and accomplishments to really pass on to your son. I mean, that would leave any son a lot to live up to.
Yeah, and he was a real self-made man. I mean, his father was a successful physician, but when Francis said that he was not going to be a doctor, I mean, he was a psychologist, but from the perspective of Adolf Mechner, that's not the same thing, even though that is technically also a doctor. He was apparently thrown out of the house when he said that he was not going to follow in his father's footsteps and be a doctor. I do believe they later reconciled, but there were some bad feelings there. But he went on and carved his own way, just as he had to some degree, carve his own way in Nazi-occupied France for several years when he was stuck there without his parents. Seems like he's an incredible guy in his own right. The main takeaways there, though, for the purposes of our story here, is that we knew for a long time, because Jordan has never been shy about talking about his father or talking about this kind of thing. We've known for a long time that his father composed the music to Karateka and Prince of Persia, because he's an adept concert pianist, so he can do things like that. So we knew he did the music for those games. But what the journals revealed is that he was really Jordan's major sounding board, and some of the most important decisions that Jordan made in the creation of Karateka were made in consultation with his father. I'm sure it was a dialogue between them, so some of the ideas might have been Jordan's just prodded by his father, some of them were his father's ideas, but it's fair to say that that game would not have been the same without his father, and not just because he did the music, but in so many ways, which we will talk about as we move along. So that's one of the reasons we want to give Francis so much attention here, is because he is actually very important to the Jordan Mechner as game designer story. The other thing is that Jordan inherited a lot of the talent of his father, which should not be surprising. Jordan Mechner he's still alive, so I shouldn't say was. At the time of this recording, he's still alive. Jordan Mechner is incredibly smart. Really, really smart guy. Jordan Mechner is also a fairly talented artist. He's a bit of a polymath. He's pretty good at art. He's very interested in movies. He's very interested in writing. He has a lot of interest in a lot of things that he has some degree of skill in, many of them creative endeavors, no doubt taking after his family. And his younger brother is a master Go player, so, that tracks too, with their father being such a great chess player. Jordan's born in 1964, and growing up, he loves a lot of things. He loves movies, he loves music, he loves art. He's pretty good at art. As a young child, he's decided that art is the thing that he wants to do. Specifically, when I say he wanted to be an artist, he wanted to be a cartoonist, which makes sense for a young child. I mean, he was good. He was actually selling his services as a caricaturist at local fairs, like paying people $5 to draw their caricature as a 12 or 13-year-old, somewhere around there.
Wow. Any of that art actually survive?
No idea. Good question. Yeah, no idea. So that was all he wanted to do in life until he finally discovered, at the age of 13, born in 1964, to give you an idea of the year range, something called a computer.
But Alex, computers are just people who sit down at an actuary table and just crunch numbers. Everyone knows that, what a computer is in 1964.
Well, we have to remember, though, we're not in 1964 anymore. That's when he was born. So he's about 13 now, so we're actually in more like 1977, 77, 78.
Computers just take up an entire room of the house.
Well, the Trinity has come along, but by this time there were some schools that did have access to computers. Normally they had access to a mainframe or a mini computer somewhere off-site, a teletype that is connected via a modem or some such to a time-shared mainframe or mini computer, and have some opportunity to fool around with computers there. Jordan was able to do that a little bit. When he was a sophomore in high school, he did get a chance to play around with a P2P11 that the school had. And in this case, I think the school actually had the P2P11 because mini computers were a little less expensive. So sometimes schools could actually have a mini computer on site as opposed to having to buy time on someone else's mainframe someplace else. They had one computer to serve all the students. So it was very hard, according to Jordan in an interview he gave in the book Game Design Theory and Practice, to get time on the computer, and the teacher wouldn't allow the students to learn how the computer actually worked. They could putz around on it, but they weren't allowed to read the manual. According to Jordan, and I don't know if he knows this or was just guessing this, but according to Jordan, it's because the teacher was afraid that if they learned how to use the computer, they would be able to hack in to all of their systems and, like Matthew Broderick in War Games, go around changing grades left and right.
It does amaze me that they go and say, "Hi, I have this computer thing that is so great for education, but I'm afraid that the children will know more about it than the adult. Therefore, they are going to get up to nefarious ends and end the world."
Exactly. Can't have any of that. So he had played around with a computer a little bit at school, but that hadn't really excited anything in him because he didn't have much of a chance. But then a friend of his got an Apple II. He's at various times said this happened in 1978 or 1979. Either year is plausible, and it really doesn't matter. It at least gives you an idea of the time frame. A friend of his got an Apple II. Of course, that was a machine that he could learn thoroughly. Apple created user manuals for it. They were not hiding the inner workings of the Apple II from their consumer base, like, say, Atari was for a time with their 8-bit computers. Once he was able to read all about what was going on in it and learn about assembly code and all of this stuff, assembly language and coding and all of this stuff, he got very excited about the possibility of using a computer. So he took all of the money that he had saved up from drawing caricatures at the fair, got a little loan from his sister to make up just a little bit of the difference, and was able to buy himself an Apple II computer. This says a couple of things here. First of all, I mean, the family's pretty well off. Grandfather's a doctor, father's an eminent psychologist. They got some money. Because Apple II's not cheap in 1979.
They formed a foundation, for crying out loud. They have money.
Exactly. Because the Apple II was not a cheap product in 1979. This says a couple of things. First of all, you know, they're not hurting for cash, but also he doesn't say in his graphic novel, because this tidbit comes from his graphic novel, he doesn't say how much Emily had to pitch in this loan, his sister. You know, his sister's a child too. It's his sister lending him some of her saved up spending money or whatever. And he probably doesn't even remember how much she lent, obviously, because it's, 45 years later, whatever. I find it interesting that he was able to buy an Apple II computer that cost over $1,000, almost entirely on the strength of the money he was making drawing caricatures at the fair. He must have had quite the business going.
Either that or his parents helped out in some subtle way, too. I mean, does he say at any point how much money he actually pulled together?
No, but he said, I'd saved up almost enough money drawing caricatures at local fairs. My sister Emily lent me the rest. It didn't come from his parents.
And if you're doing caricatures at $5 a pop, I don't know, I'm going to bring out my calculator now. Let's see. How much did an Apple II cost back then?
$1,200 something, I think.
We'll just do 1,200 divided by 5, 240.
Yeah, good gig if you can get it.
That's a lot of drawing. Plus, you got the overhead. If you're drawing caricatures, you got to buy pencils, paper, paint, whatever else.
Indeed. And, actually, the $1,200 or actually $1,300, I rounded down instead of up, was the original retail price with a small amount of RAM. He was probably buying a 48K Apple II by this point, which cost more like $2,600.
So 520 drawings at that point.
Yeah, and of course, he was a little shy. He had to get some money from his sister as well. But he had it going on. He bought himself an Apple II, and he completely immersed himself in this world. Of course, this is the same time that the golden age, the so-called golden age of arcades, is popping off. Space Invaders is out there. He falls in love with games like Space Invaders and Asteroids and Pac-Man over the next couple of years. He becomes a voracious reader of Apple II, not just manuals, but also Apple II magazines. He basically learns how to code by reading up on coding in magazines and applying what he's seeing in there to his own projects. He really, in his own words, learned game design in the arcade by just playing arcade games and kind of feeling out what really made them work. In fact, by the time that he was working on video games, computer games, when he was in college, he had even come up, interestingly enough, with kind of his own theory as explained in his journals for what made for a good game design. And he got that entirely from his fascination with arcade games. I think it's worth looking at that real fast because it's very interesting, and it speaks to how he is thinking of game design literally at that time, because we have these journals, which is just such a great thing. This is on March 11th, 1982, that he's writing this in his journal. I'm just going to quote from the journal in this case. He said, "Today I worked out a couple of principles that make arcade games fun." Like, this is how he was getting his game design education. He was playing games in the arcade, he was analyzing those games, and he was figuring out for himself, what is it that makes these games so great? These were his principles. He said, first, you have to feel in control of your ship, car, man, whatever. So that when you get hit, you say, oh shit, I should have thrusted. Then parentheses, asteroids, because, thrusting is how you move around. Instead of, oh well, another ship gone, I wonder what hit me. Then he gave the example there, Star Castle. He felt like you had to have firm control over whatever it is that you were controlling, and that you should be able to kind of be spatially aware of your surroundings at all times, and if you're a good enough player, have an out to get away. So he felt Star Castle was very arbitrary in the way it killed the player, and it felt like, oh, stupid game, the game's just against me, as opposed to Asteroids, where he felt like when he died in Asteroids, it was his fault. It may not be that every time it was his fault, because obviously even a game like Asteroids can provide you with a situation that's just unavoidable. But the key is the psychological perception that you feel like you're always in control of your own destiny. And interestingly, I'm pretty sure that's something that Ed Logg has talked about as well at times, who of course was the creator of Asteroids. Some good insights there.
He's writing this down at the age of 18.
Correct.
He's just exiting high school. He's just entering the adult world, deciding whether or not he wants to go into college or not.
Oh, he is in college, as a matter of fact.
He is in college at 18. Okay.
He was in college at 17 at a little university called Yale. I probably should have brought that up before we got into his game design theory. But yeah, at this time, he's a Yaley.
Yeah, if you're in Yale, you're probably pretty smart. And he's writing down these kinds of insights about games, not just playing them mindlessly like a lot of people do. Instead of just getting broad ideas from the game itself, he's really thinking about what feels good about a game, what feels bad about a game.
Exactly.
And really playing through the game enough time to understand this plays well and this is why.
Yeah.
Not this plays well and it's just designed bad. He can't just point to something. He's actually trying to drill down and say, this is bad, this is why it's bad, and he plays it enough to understand why.
He's basically giving himself his own course in game design, is what he's doing. I mean, he's playing the games because he enjoys them, but he's not just playing them for the enjoyment. He is also thinking about them deeply and analyzing them. So that was his first principle. Second, you should be able to control the form of your attacks. In short, have a strategy. He gave as examples Kicks, Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Pac-Man, and he gave as counterexamples Space Firebird, Scramble, and Sneakers. I don't know exactly what he's getting at here, though I think this ties in kind of to his first point a little bit as well. I think he feels like games like Scramble and Sneakers and whatnot, you're kind of just being dragged along, and you don't have a lot of opportunity to control at what moment you're choosing to make your attacks. You're just kind of forced into kind of button mashing and just kind of shooting everything that comes before you. Whereas games like Kicks and Space Invaders and Asteroids, they have more strategy. Kicks, because you have to decide in what manner you're taking control of the entire screen. Space Invaders, obviously, you have the bunkers, you have the different rows of enemies and deciding when it's best to get rid of a row, when it's best to keep a row, how to carve up your enemies. Asteroids, you have kind of the choice in the asteroids. You blow them up, they become smaller, more numerous and smaller as you blow up the larger ones. Pac-Man, of course, you get to kind of choose the moment that you go for a power pellet and turn the tables on your opponents. I assume that that's what he means by that you have more control over when you are making an attack on which part of the enemy or obstacle, as opposed to these games where it's just stuff's hurtling at you all the time and you just have to constantly button mash. That's what I assume he means, but he doesn't elaborate.
That does make sense. I can sort of really see where you are. The previous games, Pac-Man, all the other ones, you react to a changing situation, but it gives you a measure of time to think.
Right.
While Scramble and a lot of those are it's just twitch reaction. How fast can I put bullets down range and then hope that I've pushed left and right enough to get enough bullets down range to hit all the things? Really, I mean, like in Scramble and a lot of those other scrollers, arguably until you hit a boss, you could conceivably just dodge the entire time.
Yeah. I definitely think that's what he's going for there when he talks about controlling the form and having a strategy. Then third, this is his third and final principle. There should be two goals. The primary goal, which he gives as an example, getting points, should not overlap 100% with the secondary goal, which he puts in parentheses, clearing screens. In Pac-Man, for example, you can go for the monsters, which give points, or the dots, which, of course, if you get all the dots, you clear the screen. In Asteroids, the saucers or the rocks. So the more saucers you destroy in Asteroids, the more bonus points you get. So, one of the high score strategies was the lurking strategy, where you left one asteroid on the screen that you could easily avoid. And then because of the way Edlog programmed a delay in the saucer shooting, when it appeared on the screen, you could basically, if you had good reflexes, always destroy the saucer before it shot at you. So you could just play forever, racking up points without clearing the screen. You have the score goal and the clearing the screen goal, and they're in opposition to each other. In Invaders, Space Invaders he means, the creatures or the mystery ship. Again, you have the flying saucer that periodically flies by, so the longer you let the screen go on without clearing all of the aliens, you'll have to clear them eventually, because unlike in Asteroids, you can't just lurk forever, they're eventually going to land. You can choose to clear the screen, or you can take the high-risk, high-reward approach of keeping the enemies around longer, letting them get closer and closer to you, and targeting the saucer for more points. Whereas in Star Castle, you just go for the cannon. In Galaxian, the aliens. In Kix, area. You only have one goal. So he liked the idea of a game that had a primary and a secondary goal, and you had to balance how you approached each of these goals. Are you going to maximize points? Are you going to clear screens as fast as possible? Are you going for some combination of the two? That was a dynamic that he felt was interesting about the best coin-operated games in this period in history, when, of course, so many of them were based around score chasing and screen clearing. Then he goes on to say, which is an interesting insight, he says, interestingly, the only games with all of these features, the three features that he describes, are Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Asteroids, the three #1 games. Whether his analysis is entirely correct or not, he's landed on something here. He's basically like, here are the three games that have been the best-selling games. Space Invaders, Asteroids, Pac-Man. These are three things they all have in common. So he's not just looking at it from what makes it fun for me. He's also looking at the perspective of, what does the market want in a game? What drives a game to success? He's not just thinking as a player, not even as somebody who's like a hobbyist programmer. He's thinking of somebody like, what's going to be successful out there?
Something that really points to what makes some of the best game developers out there, especially during this era, are those people who really understand not just creating the game, but also the business and gameplay side to go, this is what's popular. Here are the true factors that contribute to popularity. If we replicate that instead of just cloning a game, that is the formula for sustained success.
Exactly. By 1982, he's well into his journey of attempting to be a game designer. He is at Yale University, as we said, a freshman at Yale. He's just there. On the side, he's starting to work on games and trying to sell them, and he's just having no luck. The first game that he creates is basically an Asteroids clone. He really does love Asteroids as a game. He interests Hayden Publishing in the game, a book publisher that became one of the very, very early computer game publishers at the very dawn of things. We talk about them some in our episode on the very, very early microcomputer games that we did. They're very enthusiastic about it. They think it looks great. But for a time, it looks like they're going to publish it. But then what happens, at least according to Jordan's speculation, is that Atari starts going very hard after companies that are infringing on their IP. His game is basically a straight-up Asteroids clone. Whether that's the reason or not, and I kind of believe it probably is the reason, because this is around the same time that Mattel was chickening out on doing an Asteroids clone for the Intellivision and did Astro Smash and told the programmer John Soule to do what became Astro Smash instead. I think that's believable. That's how Jordan puts it now, but at the time, according to the journals, they started making more and more ridiculous demands on him to make changes to the game. I think probably the reason that they were making these ridiculous demands is because they were trying to make it a game that was not like Asteroids. So, I mean, this all lines up. I think what's going on in the journals lines up with Jordan's later recollection, especially when you take into account other companies like Mattel, big, powerful company, also suddenly getting leery about making Asteroids clones at this time. So it all lines up. So I think it's probably true. But they start making ridiculous demands on him to the point where they're like, well, maybe you can change it so that you don't shoot the asteroids, that you just dodge the asteroids? And it's like, no. Where's the fun in that? There isn't any?
Unless I catch the asteroids and throw them back.
Right, if you replace it with some other kind of mechanic, it doesn't have to be shooting, but if you replace it with something else that has a similar effect, right, I agree with you. But no, they're just like, maybe you could just dodge the asteroids. And then they're like, yeah, maybe we could just turn them into bubbles, instead of rocks. The bubbles are bouncing around and you have to avoid the bubbles.
Then you turn the ship into a little dragon, and then you turn the asteroids into little monsters. And then you turn your bullets into the bubbles instead. And then you have Bubble Bobble.
If only they had thought that far ahead, Jeffrey. If only. But they didn't get that far. And basically, as they started making these ridiculous demands, Jordan was kind of like, forget it. But I do think it probably comes down to the copyright infringement thing. At the end of the day, Hayden got cold feet about doing something that was too similar to Asteroids. So then he started work on another game that was similar to Asteroids, but slightly different. Not just a straight-up clone like his game that he was working for Hayden was. So this game involved balls bouncing around the screen. And instead of having a wraparound effect, because, in Asteroids, when stuff goes off the screen in one direction, it appears on the other side of the screen. Instead of having a wraparound effect like Asteroids, when the balls would hit the edges of the screen, they would bounce back in on the screen. Then you're controlling a ship and you have to shoot all the balls. It's still similar to Asteroids, but it's different enough. It's not rocks, it's balls, and they bounce around a lot more, and they bounce on the edges of the screen instead of having screen wrap. So because of that, he called this game Death Bounce.
Death Bounce.
Yeah, because the balls are bouncing around. They're bouncing all around the screen. You have to avoid the bouncing while shooting them. So, yeah, Death Bounce. Because there's bouncing. And if you get hit by the bouncing things, it's death. So Death Bounce. He gets this game working pretty well. He's pretty proud of it. He keeps it pretty austere on purpose, very minimalist in terms of its graphics. The animation's working pretty well. The core gameplay loop he feels is working pretty well. So he submits this one to one of his favorite companies, Broderbund, which at this time is one of the bigger publishers in this up-and-coming computer game space. At this time, Doug Carlston, co-founder of the company and president of the company, is still also the person that is handling the game submissions, small family company. So Doug gets this game in the mail from Jordan, and he takes a look at it, and he's like, this is pretty cool, but there's not enough there. It's too simple. By this time, it's 1982. It's 1982 when he submits the game to Broderbund. By 1982, computer games and games on the Apple II are getting more sophisticated. Just about everyone has an Apple II disk drive now. Just about everybody has at least an Apple II Plus with 48K of memory. It's not like Apple II games are the most sophisticated things you've ever seen in your life at this point, but they are becoming more sophisticated. Having a very simple, repetitive game loop like that with very austere graphics is just not going to cut it anymore. So Doug Carlston basically says, we like this. We think there's some potential here, but it needs more animation, more special effects, and it needs some kind of narrative. I mean, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, but it needs some kind of narrative justification. It needs to be a little flashier, and it needs to have a little more depth to it if we're going to be able to sell this into the current market. Jordan Mechner says fine, and gets to work on fixing it, adding more effects, incorporating page flipping, which we've talked about before, which is basically a way of making Apple II games run faster and smoother because it's a bitmapped screen. So with page flipping, you're always drawing two screens at the same time. You're drawing the frame that the player sees, and you're also drawing the next frame so that you can constantly flip in the next frame faster than if you had to draw every frame at the moment that the player is seeing it. You've always got a frame in reserve, essentially. Apple IIs by this point have enough memory to make that viable. So he adds page flipping techniques, he adds more animation, he's adding explosions, he adds a color progression for the bubbles, where each time you shoot them, they change colors until you finally get to the final color and they're destroyed. So he's making it more impressive. He's doing all these things, or at least he's kind of sort of doing all these things periodically when he feels like it. Because now we're kind of getting to the heart of what the journals really reveal about Jordan Mechner, and which explains why so many of his early games take so long to make. This guy is so good at so many things and interested in so many things, he is pulled in a million different directions. First of all, he's theoretically going to college at Yale. I say theoretically, because his journal makes it very clear that in his freshman year, he was cutting more classes than he was attending.
That's not good for, graduating.
He very nearly flunked out of Yale in his freshman year. He turned it around. I mean, he was never going to be, one of the top students in the class, but he did turn it around after his freshman year and found a better balance and did better in some of his classes. But his freshman year, he was basically just skipping everything and faking it until he did not make it. It was kind of ugly. But he was theoretically in college, and he was attending some college classes. Second, he really loved film. He really loved film. It was his favorite medium. He liked film more than he liked computer games. He was an avid watcher of film. He was a member, and in some cases even an officer, of several film societies active amongst Yale students. He was not just consuming the films himself, but a part of him really wanted to make films, particularly to be a screenwriter. He really wanted to do that. He goes back and forth on this in his journal all the time, where one day he's really, really stoked to be working on his game, or one of his games that he has going. The next day, not literally the next day every time, but say the next week or the next journal entry or whatever, he's really not excited. He's like, why am I doing this? I can't summon the energy to keep going and fix all these bugs and improve all these things. I hate it. I want to write films. Then another part of his brain chimes in and is like, and I write novels, but I haven't had any of them published yet, so I warn you, I'm in a mean mood.
Bonus points if you get that reference.
Yes. Because at the same time, he's also like, I want to write a novel. He does like the idea of writing. His grandfather at this point, who had this fascinating life that we talked about, Adolf, his grandfather has just finished writing a memoir. It's not something that's being published, but he's just finished typing up a memoir. Probably not coincidentally, it's not long after his grandfather finishes his memoir that Jordan starts this journal. The first entry of the journal makes it clear that he's occasionally had some other journals in the past, but never stuck with it. I think he was really inspired from the looks of it by his grandfather's memoir to I want to have a journal that's a historical record of what I'm doing. I don't want it to be a spiral into my feelings, because since we've got it here, let me even pull that entry up and say exactly what he says, because we can do that. He says, my basic intention is to write down at the end of each day what happened, what I did, thought, felt, and so forth. so I can read it years from now and remember what it was like, I think in part inspired by that memoir. I think it's best if I don't concern myself overly with style. I'll only get frustrated and quit. The second pitfall to avoid is using this journal as a kind of valve to let off steam. For example, writing 20 pages one night about how depressed I am. I've kept that kind of journal before. Rereading it, I invariably get disgusted and throw the notebook away. If I'm depressed, I'll just say so and leave it at that. Basically, I want to write what I'll want to read later. I'll probably get better at that with practice. In short, I'm not very concerned with quantity or quality. I just want a reasonable entry for every day of my life starting now. I have to imagine he's inspired by his grandfather's memoir to want to do that, since his grandfather just went and reconstructed his life story. You know, he's really into writing. He wants to write this journal. He wants to be successful in that and not get bogged down in a way that makes him quit. And he starts thinking that he wants to write a novel during this time, too. Like, he loves writing. He loves too many things. And he bounces between them so much that it can be hard for him to focus on Death Bounce and focus on getting this game over the finish line. At this time, he's also working on some very simple, educational, letter matching game called Alphabet for some other small company as well. But he's having trouble juggling all of those things and finding the energy to do them sometimes. He goes back and forth over and over in his journal. He's like, I really want to make film. Film is the most amazing thing. You know, he spends time studying the act structure of films. He talks about films he likes. He talks about how impressed he is by Raiders of the Lost Ark, for instance. He also talks about how impressed he is with Walt Disney as an entrepreneur in the film space. And he's interested in animation, too. I mean, he's interested in art. He wanted to be a cartoonist. So, of course, if he's interested in cartoonist drawings and he's interested in movies, he's also interested in animation and Disney. His heroes during this period, he says, are Walt Disney and George Lucas. And I think that says something about what he wanted to be. He didn't just want to be a creator, though he did want to be a creator, but he wanted to be a creator and a mogul. He talks several times about how great it would be to write the ultimate game, the best game, and just strike it rich. He wants to be a creator and he wants to be a mogul. His heroes at this period in his life are Walt Disney and George Lucas. Walt Disney above all. He says they're both his heroes, but Walt Disney above all. That's why he keeps coming back to games. Because he's like, I like movies more. Not that he dislikes games, but I like movies more. But filmmaking has not changed that much since the 20s. Obviously, there have been changes, and he's a student of film, so, I mean, he knows there's been changes. I mean, the special effects things that George Lucas did were miles beyond stuff from before that. But, the basics of shooting a film in his mind have not changed much. In his own mind. He may be exaggerating how little they've changed, but this is his mindset, so we're going with it. Computer games and video games are a cutting-edge new technology. So I have an opportunity to be the Walt Disney of video games. I have the opportunity to be the George Lucas of video games. I could go make films and I could have fun doing it and I could be fulfilled doing it and I would enjoy my life. But I wouldn't be doing something new. He really wanted to do something new, but he went back and forth. He would say that one day and then another day he'd be like, yeah, but films though, I'd really like to make those. So he's going back and forth, and then the novels on the side.
Could always go the Chris Roberts route and do both.
Oh, God. Never go the Chris Roberts route. I used to like that, man. We'll have to do a Chris Roberts episode one of these days, and when we do, we will try not to be too unkind on his later career. We'll try. Yes, you could go the Chris Roberts route. He goes back and forth, plus on this novels thing. You know, he's thinking of making films. I think he's both thinking of making films like a George Lucas, but also thinking of screenwriting. He's reading William Goldman's seminal book on screenwriting, and he's just pulled in so many different directions, and even occasionally attending class. Very occasionally, but it happens, that he just doesn't get much done, so he's working on Death Bounce. He keeps upgrading things and fixing bugs and adding enhancements like the page flipping. He sends later copies on to Doug. Doug's like, yeah, this is getting better. Death Bounce could have probably been published, but he just kind of ran out of steam. He was just kind of sick of revising it. He was sick of getting more and more notes. There was one time when he really, honest to God, thought he was done with it, where Doug Carlston was like, well, it can use just a little more. It wore him down eventually. That, combined with his competing priorities, just kind of wore down any desire to do Death Bounce. And it's all in the journals, which are just fascinating to see. It's all in the journals. However, there is an important thing that happens in the middle of all of this. In the middle of this, all of this back and forth between Jordan and Doug and the folks at Broderbund. At some point in the middle of this, not at the very beginning, but not at the very end either. I could tell you the exact day. I will tell you the exact day. It's codified in the journal. On June the 25th, 1982, Jordan receives in the mail from his friends at Broderbund, and they told him it was coming, their latest hit game, along with a joystick for the Apple II to help him play it. That little hit game is a thing called Choplifter. We've talked about Choplifter. We've done Broderbund episodes. We won't go into detail here, but basically it was created by another independent game author, Dan Gorlin. It's basically Defender with a helicopter. There's some other differences, but its core gameplay loop is basically Defender with a helicopter. The thing that makes it such a massive hit is that the animation is incredible. It is smooth. It has little guys running around that you have to rescue that are well animated. We've talked about this before. The Apple II, because it was just a bitmap screen, because it didn't have hardware sprites, I don't think it had hardware scrolling. It had very little in the hardware that dictated how you would use the graphics on this thing. It was just a bitmap screen. Success or failure on the Apple II really hinged on how innovative a programmer you were. Like, this was an environment where being an amazing programmer gave you an edge. Dan Gorlin was an amazing programmer, and he came up with a way to do these smooth animations. Choplifter was a massive hit, and Jordan was blown away when he saw it. He was basically like, I have got to do animation like that. And in fact, in some of his later Death Bounce revisions, he was even thinking about putting a little animated guy in the game, where if you lost a ship, your guy would eject from the ship and fall to, I guess they'd be ground at this point, fall to the ground, and then he would run over to another ship and get in the ship to continue the fight. Because, he's being pressed to put more little graphical and special effects touches in the game. That's what Doug's been telling him to do. So he thought that might be a fun one. Like, he's getting obsessed with the animation in Choplifter. He's getting obsessed with the animation of the people in Choplifter. And he's also really impressed with the joystick controls in Choplifter. He tries to incorporate a little bit of that into Death Bounce, which is still an ongoing concern at this time. But the other thing that he decides to do is he wants to create a new game. Kind of forget about this Death Bounce stuff. He wants to create a new game that is as flawlessly and wonderfully animated as Choplifter, and perhaps as well using human figures. He doesn't quite get to an end game from that right away. But we know, because we have the journals again, on July the 7th, 1982, at this time, he had started work on... He was always kind of thinking of new games that he could start, and he would kind of think about them for a couple of days and then think better of it and abandon them, or modify it and abandon them. Like, there's a lot of game ideas that he never really got off the ground. He's working on a game at this point, just that he's barely started. I mean, there's no real work done on it, that he's calling Earth Game. On July 7th, 1982, he writes in his journal, Earth Game. I started a couple of days ago. Today I didn't do anything on it because my mind was occupied with ... and the next paragraph, Karate Game.
Karate Game, you say?
Karate Game. He says, I worked out, with David's advice, somebody he knew, an awesome system using one joystick and the keyboard to control a karateka, and an elaborate combat system to determine what effect your blows have on your opponent, and vice versa. Then he says, but I must finish Earth first. It being summer, I could be done by the end of July. he is often overly optimistic in here about how quickly he can be done with things because he can never seem to muster the enthusiasm to follow through. Obviously, he never finishes the Earth game, and instead, he will soon be full speed ahead on this karate game. Why karate? He's given a couple of explanations for this. First of all, it certainly starts with Choplifter in the animation. He wants to do something that shows off really smooth animation. Animating a human is always a pretty cool feat to pull off. There are several games in this period that just start with somebody being like, I want to animate a human. What can I do with him? Pitfall started the same way. David Crane created a running man, and he's like, I have a running man. What should I do with him? Put him in the jungle hunting treasure, and you get pitfalls. It starts with this idea that he wants to do really slick animation because of Choplifter, and animating humans is a really good way to show off slick animation. Another thing was his film likes at the time, what he was really getting into in films. Of course, he's watching tons of films. One of his favorites at this time is a classic Akira Kurosawa movie, The Seven Samurai. Now, obviously, that's not a karate movie. It's seven samurai defending a village from bandits, and doing so with swords, not karate. He was kind of thinking in an Eastern mindset, and that gave him the idea of it would be cool to do something in an Eastern setting. Then the final thing was, his mother at the time was really into karate, was receiving regular karate lessons, and Jordan himself was also taking some karate lessons, though the sense I get from the journals and subsequent interviews is that he wasn't nearly as into it as his mother was. But he had taken some karate lessons, was taking some karate lessons as well. So put all of those things together, and probably some other stuff going on in his mind as well, and you get the idea for Karateka. It was a very different idea at this point. In the beginning, it was actually going to be more like Karate Champ. He wasn't influenced by Karate Champ. There's no indication in his journals that he'd seen Karate Champ. Actually, this is 1982 still, so he couldn't have seen Karate Champ, because even though Karateka and Karate Champ both came out in 1984, he was working on Karateka a long time before it came out. He started it in the summer after his freshman year and didn't finish it until his senior year at Yale. It was going to actually be more like Karate Champ. It was just going to be karate matches. You would have two players, and they would have a combination of various karate moves that they could use. And at this point, as he said, with a combination of joystick and keyboard control. You would just be in a dojo, on a mat, and you would have a karate match. Presumably first to 3 points or whatever wins the match. And that was going to be the entire game. He got a lot of pushback from the people around him, because another thing that's very clear from this is as he's making games, he is constantly sharing his thoughts and ideas and what he's doing with his friends and his family. So he's always got input coming in from various sources, and all of his games in this period, at least, are shaped by some of those suggestions from other people. He even said in that one entry that we read, with David's help on that one thing that he was doing. He got a lot of pushback pretty quickly on that idea because everyone thought that that was going to get repetitive in a hurry. This is kind of similar to the Doug Carlston problem with Death Bounce. I mean, he's not consulting Carlston on this at this point, but Carlston saw a good game in Death Bounce, but it was just too simple. There weren't enough interesting gameplay loops, not enough interest in special effects. Let's have a little bit of story just to pull the person in. Too simple. That's what this karate game was looking like at this point, too, is that would just be way too simple. He resisted for a while. According to his journal, he resisted for a while the idea of opening the game up and having you do kind of a scrolling area and having multiple encounters. He resisted that for a while, but he doesn't have the eureka moment in his journal. He doesn't have a moment where he's like, all right, fine. We'll have multiple opponents and we'll have the game scroll and everything. But he does come around to that idea at some point, even though the journals don't capture it. So he knows there's going to be some kind of progression to it. He gets to work animating this thing. And the animation's going okay, but it's not quite up to the level that he wants it to be. This is why I was saying, actually, father is going to be very important to this game. Because we've got another journal entry here that I am going to read in just a second that tells about his breakthrough with animation. This is now March 8th, 1983. He had the idea for this game in July 7th, 1982, and by March 8th, 1983, not a lot has been done on it yet. Just to give you an idea of his extended cycle, because he bounces around, he death bounces around from thing to thing to thing, working on different programs, going to class, getting involved in movies, watching movies, studying movies, maybe being a screenwriter. He's just bouncing around. But March 8th, 1983, worked on Karateka all day again. The main achievement today was mocking up some temporary animation routines to see what they looked like in motion. They looked surprisingly good, considering how rough they are. And then here's the big thing. Dad suggested filming somebody and counting the frames. Mom suggested Dennis, which is her karate instructor, tomorrow evening. I remembered the film editing machine we had. And then he says, still have? ? His dad is the one that actually plants the idea in his head of filming somebody and using those frames. I don't think he comes out and quite says rotoscoping at this point. I don't think that filming somebody and counting the frames means strictly rotoscoping. You know, that's not a euphemism for rotoscoping. I think from this, Jordan himself gets the idea to rotoscope because he is a big fan of Walt Disney. And he certainly knows animation and he knows what rotoscoping is. But it's his father that plants in his head, why don't you film somebody? And then it's his mother who plants the idea in his head, like, say, maybe my karate instructor. So that's what he does.
I was wondering was when you said that his father gave input, whether or not he would give direct ideas or if in their conversations he would be more of a sounding board and reflect and help Jordan refine his ideas down and really provide a degree of focusing for this nova of creativity that his son has and just focus it on where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of both. In this case, he gave a direct suggestion, like very direct. We're going to talk about a couple of other things in just a couple of minutes here where it sounds like it was more sounding board. But his dad was actually very important in turning him on to this idea. Like, I don't think his dad got him all the way to rotoscoping, but it was his dad that gave him the idea to film. Then he got to thinking, wait, we have a film editing machine. Because they're wealthy, I guess. You know, they had a Super 8, and then they actually had an old film editing machine that they had bought probably during that period of time when home movies were all the rage, and, you know, people wanted to make their own Super 8 home movies and bought a film editing machine because they had money, and so they had one someplace. So he was like, yeah, I can take some Super 8 film, and then I have my own film editing machine. I can cut those frames and choose the ones I want, and then I can rotoscope, and it'll be great. That's what he does. He films Dennis. The first attempt is not successful. He sets up the camera wrong. He doesn't get film. So he films him again, and it works out. And he gets the animation that he needs to do the rotoscoping to make that animation so great in Karateka. And then he actually, according to his graphic novel, he actually had his dad was a very good sport and put on a gi and actually also did some motions for him, some non-karate moves. His father didn't know karate, but, you know, the game starts with our Karateka climbing up a cliff. So he actually had his father do the climbing motion. So he had his father do some things that were not strictly karate moves that gave him all the animation he needed. It's kind of interesting where the game goes from there because according to the journals, and we won't get into all the intricacies of it, he keeps bouncing back and forth from really simple to more complex. Like in the beginning, he had this joystick keyboard combination of controls because there was a lot going on. There were a lot of different karate moves that he wanted the player to be able to do. He wanted the player to be able to turn around and deal with opponents on both sides of him and all of this stuff. As he continued to create it, he decided that that was too complicated, and he actually figured out a way to get all the controls on just the joystick, and he basically cut down on the number of moves, just to a couple of really core crucial moves. And he also cut the ability to turn around, made it so that you were always just moving in a single direction the entire time. And that way, he could get all of the controls onto just the joystick, which was going to streamline it in a way that had a lot of appeal. At this point, it's still a very short game. He's not seeing there as being a huge number of encounters, just a couple of encounters with guards and a final encounter with the big bad or whatever that's holding the princess, at whatever point he decided that there was a princess being rescued. Then, in the gameplay loop, though, is the next point that his father got really involved. There's another entry I want to read around that. because it's very interesting. So flash forward now, because he's been working on this for so long, flash forward to January 2nd of 1984. He's been really working on, at this point, on getting all the elements together, figuring out all of the environments that he wants the game to take place in, figuring out stuff with the guards. He's been doing all of this stuff. So on January 2nd, 1984, 11 hours, the new hall and dungeon are in, because he's been playing around with the setting and everything. The real accomplishment was on the game design front. Dad and I realized, so he's been using his dad as a sounding board this whole time. So in this case, there's no indication of what his dad is suggesting and how much he's just being a sounding board. But Dad and I realized the game lacks two important elements: conflict of interest and vigilance. What he means by that, because it becomes a little clearer in the entry, but I just want to stop and explain. What he means by that is, for conflict of interest, there needs to be a balance between the things you want to do. It's similar to what he discovered in his arcade game analysis, which is you need to have those competing objectives. So there's the clear the screen objective and there's the high score objective, and you have to have a conflict between these two objectives. So at this point, you're basically just running forward, encountering a guard, fighting a guard, running forward, encountering another guard. That's all you're doing. There's no trade-off. There's no choice in how you proceed. There's no strategy. It's more like his hated Scramble than it is like his beloved Asteroids, to really oversimplify the point. Then vigilance is that there's really nothing you have to keep an eye out for. You know when the guards are coming. There's nothing that's going to take you really by surprise. There's nothing that makes you think, I've got to be watching what I'm doing all the time. He and his dad is working with him on this, and his dad's a psychologist. I mean, psychology ain't a bad field to be in, to think about what drives a person to have fun in a game or what elements of a game cause a player to want to keep playing. I mean, psychology ain't a bad field for game design at all, quite frankly. So to continue the entry, so we came up with a solution. The villain's pet vulture, which attacks you every now and then when you're between guards. You need to be in fighting stance when it comes on screen and punch or kick to the correct height to repel its attack. If you're in running stance, you'll get clobbered and lose a lot of hit points. So why not always stay in fighting stance? Trade-off. Running is faster. This addition, I think, will improve the game immeasurably. It makes it a real game. So now by adding this bird in, which I think eventually becomes an eagle rather than a vulture, but that's immaterial. By adding this bird in, he's adding an element of unpredictability, and he's adding something that needs you to make a trade-off. Do you charge forward, or do you move forward more cautiously so you're ready when the bird shows up to attack? Now you have a conflict, two competing things that you want to do and the trade-offs you have to make between them. And you have vigilance because you have this other element that you have to be on the watch for that is more unpredictable than the guards.
If I recall correctly, too, if you advance too slowly, more guards get sent your way. You have to reach certain checkpoints, otherwise new guards show up. So that plays into this as well.
Yes, that's something that comes just a little later than this. I mean, you're absolutely right. But this is the kind of things that he's thinking about to create those trade-offs between speed and caution. When he says it makes it a real game, even though he doesn't say it explicitly, he's clearly thinking back to those principles that he feels he's figured out on what makes a game fun. I just think that's, it's great to have this journal and see some insights into that. Just a few days later, like they're cooking with gas now, he has another brainstorming session with his father and another important insight, which goes to what you were talking about. This is the January 8th, 1984 entry. In a brainstorming session with Dad, I got many good ideas. The most important is to, 1, add footstep sounds for you and the guards. So just, a little bell and whistle. And 2, keep cross-cutting between the two of you. If you stop running, this is the point that you're making, it cuts back to the guard running toward you. Tension! Exclamation point. This goes back to his love of film, too. Cross-cutting was not something that was really being done in video games at this time, but it is something that had been used in film for decades. And he was an enthusiast of early silent films, like the films of D.W. Griffith, which his films are in many ways horrible today for a variety of reasons, like helping resurrect interest in the Ku Klux Klan, thanks a lot, Birth of a Nation. But setting aside the unfortunate politics of his movies, and I don't think Jordan was in any way interested in his politics, just to be very clear, D.W. Griffith was one of the pioneers of feature filmmaking and one of the pioneers of dramatic filmmaking. And so from this early silent film era, he gets this idea of cross-cutting, cutting between you, the protagonist, and the antagonists that are coming towards you. And again, like you said, this is another way he's ramping up the tension that if you stop, like you said, then you see guards coming towards you. So you have to keep moving. He's coming up with these ideas for the tension, but again, it's in brainstorming sessions with his dad. How much of it's his dad, how much of it is Jordan, I don't know, but he may not be quite the co-creator of this game. But Francis Mechner is actually way more involved in creating Karateka than just doing the music. He is right there helping his son get some of the key ideas for the game. So at this point, the game is starting to get much closer to done, much closer to a state that we would recognize Karateka as being in the final form that was released in 1984. He sends it off to Broderbund. There's no guarantee that Broderbund would publish. He's not under contract with Broderbund. It's just Broderbund published, or was almost ready to publish his last game. He likes Doug. He likes the people there. He likes the games of the company. So he's sending it off to Broderbund. He even says in his journal, if this doesn't work out, I'll try, like, Electronic Arts, maybe. But he sends it off to Broderbund. The Broderbund people are really enamored with it. But, again, the Broderbund people are very particular about what they publish. And, you know, they take submissions, but they don't just throw them out there willy-nilly. They have opinions as well. And they're like, there's a lot of great game here, and we think there's a great game here, but it's not quite ready yet. So in the summer of 1984, in between college years at Yale, he actually flies out to California for 2 months. This is something that Broderbund did with a lot of their artists, a lot of their creators, I mean. They had a small in-house staff that they would often use to kind of help polish projects. What they would do is if they had a game creator they really liked that was creating a game they'd really like, they'd invite them to come to their office for a few months, provide them all of the support infrastructure they needed in the office to finish their game. And they'd assign a project manager to it, and they'd have support from some of the in-house talent at the company, programmers and artists and animators. You know, they'd be set up with a temporary office, and they could kind of get the benefits of being part of the company without actually being part of the company. You know, he's not joining Broderbund. He's still a freelancer. He'll still get royalties at the end, not salary, but he gets that help. He comes in, and one of the main things that they want him to do is make it a little longer. The game is kind of still pretty short at this point, even though it's more than just two people fighting on a single screen in a dojo map. He's got the guards. He's got the buzzard or the eagle or whatever the heck it is. He's got the final big boss man that you have to kill to rescue the princess. The progression across the various scenes is still relatively short. A lot of what happens during this time is he works particularly with Lauren Elliott and Gene Portwood to lengthen the game, to clean up the animations in the game. Gene Portwood, a former Disney animator, so he really knows his stuff. At this point, in addition to the eagle, there's also like a big cat, like a predatory cat in the game. I don't know if it's a tiger or what, but, a cat of some kind. They do end up taking that out because it ends up being one thing too many. But they work on that for a while before scrapping it. They don't get the game completely done in that summer, but they get it very close to done and also commission a Commodore 64 port because he's an Apple II guy and Apple II is going to be the lead platform, and Broderbund is still a strong proponent of the Apple II, but there's no doubting the Commodore 64 is a thing. So they also enlist another programmer at this point to start doing a port to the Commodore 64. He goes back to school for senior year, has to spend a little more time finishing up the game, and then in late 1984, it releases. It's a decent hit. It's not the biggest hit in the world. I do think it has a long tail in terms of sales. It's certainly successful. Everyone's happy that it's successful, even if it's not quite as huge a hit as Choplifter had been. With that success and feeling pretty good about that, Mechner starts thinking about what he might want to do as his next game. So I want to read one final entry from this first journal, because he broke it up into 2 parts, the 2 volumes that he published, as a little teaser as to where we may be going in our part 2. So now I want to flash forward to April 4th, 1985. The game came out around October 1984, Karateka, so it's been in the market for a few months. He's been pondering his future because it's his senior year. It's about time to go out in the world. And he's been going back and forth again, like, what do I really want to do? Do I want to be a screenwriter? Do I want to be a video game designer? I don't know. You know, he's back to this thing of, what am I going to do with my life? Should I be a screenwriter? Should I be a game designer? But also, regardless, I should probably do something right now. I really need to come up with another game idea. Even though what I might do is be a screenwriter, I still should come up with a game idea. So he's been kind of having this conversation with himself for the last few months in the journal. And then he says, April 4th, 1985. Spent the evening on Drax, which I think is some kind of network. More design decisions. 1. A puzzle game, like Lode Runner and Dr. Creep. The kind where you start out on a new level and say, okay, what am I going to have to do here? The kind with 50 levels and 5 different games in a builder mode where you make your own games, only with great graphics. 2. Real perspective. This will be a bitch, but I think worth it. 3. A Karateka-type storyline. Get to the end and rescue the girl. Large figure Karateka-style animated sequences at the beginning and end. A human interest to complement the cool logic of the gameplay. 4. Lots of ways of getting squashed, impaled, crushed, and otherwise destroyed. Basically Indiana Jones in spirit, if not in details. Plenty of narrow escapes, split-second timing, hair-raising brushes with death. Big questions remaining. Where? When? Who is the villain? What's the MacGuffin? Are you in ancient Greece, medieval Europe, a remote planet, a futuristic metropolis? Are your enemies rovers? That could be cool, a big bouncing spheroid. Robots? Guards with crossbows? Or what? What's the theme? The setting. So as we can see at this early date, even though he has a lot of questions still to answer, like where and when this game is going to be set, he has already landed on most of the core elements of gameplay for what will become Prince of Persia.
Definitely an interesting person. It just seems that he just lacks from focus, really, and follow through to finish projects.
Absolutely. At this point in his life, he totally did. In part 2, we're going to see that even more. I mean, at the end of these sets of journals, and, they're only broken up for publication. It's not like while he was creating them in real time, they were Volume 1, Volume 2. It's just this is where he split them. At the end of this journal, we're already seeing a conflict being set up that I haven't really talked about. I mentioned it, but I just didn't quote from it. About, am I a game designer and am I a screenwriter? That existential question is going to dog him for the next 4 years because he has this idea for this game decently fleshed out by April 4th, 1985. I mean, he has questions, but it's basically fleshed out. Prince of Persia will not come out until 1989. We have a lot more indecision ahead as we look at his life over the next 4 years in our second part of this Jordan Mechner expose.
All right, kids. I guess we will go see how it becomes Prince of Persia next time on They Create Worlds. Check out our show notes at podcast.theycreateworlds.com, where we have links to some of the things that we discussed in this and other episodes. You can check out Alex's video game history blog at videogamehistorian.wordpress.com. Alex's book, They Create Worlds, the story of the people and companies that shaped the video game industry, Volume 1, can now be ordered through CRC Press and at major online retailers. Feel free to email us at feedback@theycreateworlds.com. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/theycreateworld. If you do sign up, please do so through the website and not through the iOS app. This saves you from 30% Apple markup. We understand that you may not be able to financially support us, but you can still support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting service that you use. We now have the podcast available on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Intro music is Airplane Mode by Josh Woodward, found at joshwoodward.com/song/airplane mode, used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Outro music is Bacterial Love by Roll Music, found at freemusicarchive.org, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License.